Hello and welcome to a conversation with Pat Badger. I'm your host, Eric Miller. This is part of the Pods and Sods network, and I want to thank you, as always, for clicking the download button or the subscribe button or whatever series of buttons you click in order to find this episode. It's always super appreciated, so thanks for that. Extreme is one of my favorite bands. I love every song on every record, frontwards, backwards. Can't get enough. And I've seen a lot of interviews, kind of longer form interviews with Nuno. I actually did one with myself, and with Gary and things like that. And I haven't seen really any with Pat, so I wanted to approach Pat and get his perspective on the Extreme career, his experiences with Extreme, and even more than that, he's actually started embarking on some solo albums. He had one maybe 2 years ago called Badger, and he has a new one now that's kind of in the crowdfunding stages, Nasty Ass Honey Badgers, which is and his solo music is really good. If you're an Extreme fan and you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to do so. It should be right up your alley, man. It's melodic and just solid. So it was a real thrill to talk to him, at great length about, like I said, his experiences in Extreme and his new music and things like that. So hopefully you will enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. So without any further ado, Mr. Pat Badger. Gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Pat Badger. Welcome, Pat.
Hey, Eric. How are you?
Doing well, man. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me. We were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I haven't seen that you've done a lot of these sort of long form interviews. So I'm very appreciative that you said yes to mine. So I'm looking forward to talking with you about your career and current projects and things like that.
Yeah, cool. I mean, there has, I've obviously done a lot of interviews, in the past, more for like, printed stuff. But, obviously the internet has become such a, like the wild, wild west of,
right? Oh, yeah.
Of opportunities. So, it's definitely my pleasure to talk to you.
Awesome. Going back to the beginnings. So Extreme is famously from the Boston area, and I'm assuming you grew up in that region. How did you first start playing? Like, what instrument did you pick up, and how did you discover music?
Well, when I was real young, like in my teens, my older brother, always played music around the house. I grew up, listening to Beatles, The Who, a lot of kind of British invasion stuff, and also he was a big like folk fan, Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul and Mary, all that kind of 60s stuff.
Right.
And so I was always kind of exposed to that, and he also sang and played the guitar. So I just had at a kind of younger age, just a appreciation for music, and had it around the house a lot. So I did play a bit of acoustic guitar. I took lessons when I was young.
Okay.
And then it wasn't until maybe I was like a teenager, middle school, that I got myself a bass guitar and started learning bass.
Right.
And then from that point, I still play a little guitar.
Right.
But obviously my primary instrument's always been bass, and also singing.
Were there bass players that drew you to picking up the bass as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Paul McCartney.
Right.
Then I was also a big Kiss fan.
Okay.
And so, I wanted to be the guy that spits blood and breathes fire.
Right. I
so
think
what instrument does that guy play? That's what I want to play.
Right. I think there's a picture of you in one of your Pledge music videos of you wearing makeup as a kid, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah. In fact, I have that Polaroid on my wall right next to me, next to a photo with Kiss, with me and my son with them in full makeup. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
So
Dreams do come true.
there you go. So you were a Gene guy as a kid. It sounds like.
Oh, I was just, I was a big Kiss fan.
Right.
So, not just Gene, but certainly the appeal of being able to spit blood and, breathe fire,
Right.
I think trumped the other guys.
Right. Yeah. No doubt. I think for a lot of people. Um, so I'm assuming you started playing out, forming like high school bands, kinds of things. Was that kind of the next step?
Yeah, I mean, we had a little high school band, obviously playing cover tunes. There was no originals.
Right.
But we would play at parties and, mess around in our basements and garages and torture our parents. Had the police come a couple of times with neighbors complaining and that kind of stuff.
That's when you know you're
Um,
doing it right, right?
yeah, exactly. It was the classic, it was the classic high school band, played at the talent show, all that kind of stuff, so it was fun.
Was this is all pre Gary and Nuno? Is this with your brother? Did you play with your brother?
No, my brother, again, he was more of a, he played acoustic and sang,
Right.
Once I got into bass, it was more like I wanted to be in a rock band.
Right.
I, kind of branched off and started listening to stuff that is heavier than he really was into. Like we have some common ground, like the Who and that kind of stuff,
Right.
or the Stones. But once I started getting into like Kiss and Cheap Trick and Van Halen and stuff, that wasn't really up his alley. You
Gotcha.
know.
How did
So
you? I think you connected with Gary and Nuno around '87, if I'm not
that
mistaken.
is true.
Um,
Yeah.
how did that? How did you hook up with those guys?
Well, it was actually about a year before I actually joined Extreme. I jammed with those guys. There's a couple of photos floating around the internet too, and the story goes, it was around Halloween, and I was actually working. While I was in high school, I was actually working at a custom guitar shop,
Okay.
and Nuno used to come in, and I got to know him through the guitar shop. And there was a time when he called me and said, "Hey, there's this gig they're doing for Halloween. There's like a local rock club in town called Celebration."
Hmm.
And anyone from Boston might remember it was right downstairs from this club called Narcissus in Kenmore Square. And the promoter there decided, well, why don't we have like a fun Halloween theme party, and different guys from different bands can get together and basically imitate their favorite heroes.
Right.
So Gary and Nuno and Paul Geary, Nuno had just joined Extreme, and they decided to do an Aerosmith tribute.
Cool.
And so Nuno said, "Hey, if you're into it, why don't you come down and we'll jam? You can be Tom Hamilton." And so I learned a dozen Aerosmith tunes, and we jammed together. And then it was about a year later, I was again at the guitar shop, and I got a phone call from Nuno saying that their bass player was leaving, like quitting the band, the guy that was the original bass player of Extreme. And he said, "You got to come down and try out or whatever, and play with us." And then, obviously, then I got the gig, and then, the rest is Extreme history.
Right. Did it feel like, did you feel a click when you first started playing with those guys?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of into the same bands that they were into. Like I mentioned, some of the bands like Aerosmith, Van Halen,
Right.
and Extreme had already they had a name going in Boston. They were starting to have some success, and I was playing in bands that were like opening for those guys.
Oh, right.
So for me, it was definitely like, oh, it's kind of like stepping into something that was, bigger and better things.
Right. And they were already doing originals and things like that at that point.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah. In fact, a they had made an EP under the name The Dream
right.
before Nuno had even joined, and so they they were recording a lot of demos and that kind of stuff with Nuno, and then I joined about a year later after he had joined.
Right. Did you? An interesting thing about Extreme, from a fan perspective, right, is, and maybe we'll focus on this a little bit as we go through the albums, but there seems to be a vision that kind of flows along the bands you're talking about, the Van Halens and the Queens and things like that, of like a career trajectory, right? From the first album is, I mean, there's a mixture on there, but it's kind of a party record in some ways, right? And then the second one it kind of gets more ambitious as time goes on. In those early days, did that seem to be kind of a mission? Like, was that ever talked about, or it kind of just evolved naturally?
It kind of just evolved naturally, to be honest. We've always been, like you said, I mean, we kind of have worn some of our influences on our sleeve.
Right.
I think you can hear bits of those bands you just mentioned. You can hear the influence in our music, and whether it's musically or lyrically.
Right.
And I think just the band was growing at the time. And, I can't imagine that in the headspace that we were in 1988 or 89 when we were recording the debut record, we weren't, mature enough to do what ended up coming out on like 3 sides or whatever. So
Right.
It was definitely, a growth period for us in our young 20s.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those the first record and second record, I think, are largely self-produced. Although they're credited, I guess, to Mac and Michael Wagner, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But I think probably is that true?
There's some things about the first record that Mac definitely had some input. That was more like arranging some of the songs. There's some demos that are floating around of some of those tunes that we did learn a lot from Mac, with some of the arrangements. And then sound-wise, though, sonically, Bob St. John stepped into the picture, and he had done a lot of our demos and stuff with us. We actually recorded a full album with Mac at one point, and not a lot of people know this. We ended up scrapping the whole record.
Oh, wow.
And ended up re-recording the first record. And in fact, I think I have a cassette around with the original version.
Oh, wow.
And so it was, again, he had some input, but we weren't really happy sonically with how it had come out. So we brought Bob St. John in and ended up thinking, oh, maybe we can salvage what's there. But as time went on, we ended up recording and re-recording more and more till the whole thing was basically re-recorded.
Gotcha.
And then when I think we used some of the things we had kind of learned from Mac in writing Porn Graffiti, I think a lot of the arrangements and the songs were already complete when it came time. We were even playing these songs out, because there was a kind of a delay in putting the first record out. So a lot of the songs were being created and written, and even we played a lot of stuff out live on our first album tour that ended up on Porn Graffiti.
Right.
And Michael Wagner, I think, had more to do with, more, instead of the songwriting and arranging elements of producing, he had more to do with the sonic sound quality of Porn Graffiti.
Gotcha.
Mixing it. And,
gotcha.
So they definitely had their stamp on both records, but in different ways.
Right. I would be remiss, because any Extreme fan listening to this is asking this question in their head right now, which is, that original version of the cassette of the first album, is it the same tracks, just off the top of your head, do you know? Same songs, just different recordings?
Yeah, no, it was definitely the same songs.
Okay.
Just some different recordings. And
gotcha.
That stuff will probably never see the light of day, though. Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so, because you ultimately came out with the version that you were, you wanted to present. It's interesting that you kind of say that about Mac in terms of the sonic nature, because he, you know, that's the dude that did Don't Say No, and he did, you know, The Game. Like, those records sound great, you know, so it's interesting that that
You know,
didn't.
it's funny. It's funny because you're right in saying that, but at the time, if you go back to 1988 or 1989, drum sounds definitely had taken a different, you know, a whole new life. And you know, I think now it's kind of like, you know, max production and all that kind of natural sounds. They're back in style, where in the '88 they kind of had gone out of style.
Right.
And so I think at the time, you know, between the record company, our A&R guy, and us, we were kind of like, wow, this isn't really sounding like records that are coming out right now. You know, it sounded at the time dated, but now, you know, it's kind of come full circle to where things sound a little more natural now, and not the '80s big drum sounds and samples and all those things. And now to me, albums like our first album sound dated. So it's kind of
Right.
it's kind of funny how things, you know, time changes your perception on things.
Everybody was born in here. Sure as hell gonna die
in terms of, I guess in terms of A&R, I don't know if Extreme had the same A&R through the A&M days, but um, like I said, the first album's kind of a partier record, and again, that's a oversimplification of it, right? But then the second album seems to be um, growing, more ambitious, right? Did you have solid A&R behind you at the label to help sort of chart those waters?
I think they didn't step in too much as far as maybe some of the attitude or lyrics, or whether it was more serious or more like lighthearted or party rock, however you want to call it.
Right.
They always had more to do with, okay, which songs are going to be selected, and they wanted input as far as who's going to mix it and who's going to produce it, and they didn't get too much into the content of the song. It was more selections of the songs, and which song is going to be a single, and who's going to direct the video, and all that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
To get their
Gotcha.
hands into.
Gotcha. Did you have, so on the first couple records, all the writing is credited to Gary and Nuno. Did you, like, how much room was there in those songs for you to do your own thing?
As far as bass wise, there was room. At the time, there was Nuno was just so, like, he was on a mission. Like, he was so prolific at the time. He would sit there for hours and record full demos that, if there was a great bass part, and a lot of the stuff, obviously, there's, like, kind of unison stuff where I'm playing the same riffs as him.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a whole, like, it was like, if it isn't broke, don't fix it,
Right.
So, a lot of the songs he actually musically, he wrote in those days. It wasn't until, like, later records or now where we're all, participate much more in the songwriting.
Of course. Yeah. Moving on, I have to ask you about Concert for Life, because that is just an incredible moment in time, and much credit to you guys. I always characterize that as you guys were to Concert for Life what Queen was to Live Aid, which, I can't think of a better compliment than that. How did that Queen medley come about?
You confused me for a second, because I don't know if that was the title of the. Was that actually the title of the concert, or was it? Obviously it was the Freddie Mercury tribute for Concert for AIDS Awareness.
Yeah, I think it was called. I think it was Concert for Life. I think that was the name of it. I'm doing it from memory, but I'm an old guy, so
yeah,
I'm wrong.
Well, anyway, everyone knows we're talking about the Freddie Mercury tribute concert.
Of course, right.
So, yeah, so it was. For us, I mean, we have to say, if there was, like, moments that we can point at in our career that were, like, some of the peaks, because everyone obviously has peaks and valleys. That was definitely one of the most thrilling peaks that any of us, we couldn't have even dreamt that up, even a year before it happened. We were obviously big Queen fans. We met Brian at a time. It was obviously difficult for him, because it was during a time where Freddie Mercury was sick, but it wasn't until, like, right before his death that he even publicly announced that he had AIDS. So we had met Brian and became really good friends with him, and he actually came on stage with us and had done some appearances, really supportive of the band, and invited us to play after Freddie, announced he had AIDS and was, gone so quickly. It was several months after that he said, we're putting together this concert really to celebrate his life and for AIDS awareness, and, would you guys, come join us? And, of course, the answer was yes. We were, like, thrilled
right.
to ever be asked to do something like that,
Right.
And then to find out all the other artists that, really legendary people that we were going to be, on the same poster with and televised with, and we were just like blown away. So, at the time we were like, well, do we play our own original stuff, or, this is a Queen tribute. Let's just like play Queen songs. We know the stuff like the back of our hands, and we'll put together a cool medley, kind of like Queen. Live Killers has like shortened versions of their songs, and it is like this medley.
Right.
That was obviously the kind of the inspiration for what we did. And so we, it was during the time while we were recording Three Sides. We took we were moonlighting in between recording songs. We'd run through the Queen set. We actually flew to England, played the show, and then the next day, literally the very next day, we were in the studio recording the orchestration for the third side of Three Sides. Right. So the whole weekend was one of the, kind of one of these indelible moments that, none of us will ever forget. I can even remember sensations of like what the air temperature felt like that day when we were on stage,
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a mind-blowing experience, and looking back, what an honor to be asked to be part of that thing.
Yeah, I've watched that clip a million times, and I get goosebumps every time. You guys just killed it, every one of you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, how does it feel playing Another One Bites the Dust in that building, on that day with that crowd, right? That's got to be.
Can't even put it into words, and I still get goosebumps or chills when I see the crowd clapping to Radio Gaga.
Yeah.
And remember staring out at that in disbelief, like I can't believe this is really happening.
Did you have?
I think, hopefully Freddie was smiling down on us.
Yeah, no doubt he was. This is kind of a slight detour, but did you? So the other guys from Queen were there. You said you had met Brian, but obviously Roger and John were there, and I'm kind of interested in John Deacon and in that he's kind of retired, right? He's kind of left from the public eye. Did you, as the bass player, did you have any interaction with him specifically?
Yeah, actually, after we played, we actually made after the whole gig, we actually met the entire band in their dressing room.
Right.
And I got a chance to talk to John and really just told him how much I admired, the musicality of his bass playing over the years and how melodic he is. And he was very very humble, very kind of shy.
Right.
I think some of his shyness, he's I think when he retired, he was just kind of like all done with the whole, I don't think the whole rock star thing was for him.
Right.
He kind of was like, kind of a bit of a shy, reclusive guy. So I think when, if I'm not mistaken, that was his last public performance with Queen.
I think so. Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. And at the time, I didn't know, or who, no one really knew. It's not like they announced he was retiring. But, we met them all. They were all very complimentary of our set. In fact, I think John Deacon told me he listened to our set on the radio on his way into the venue.
That's cool.
So, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And another pretty mind-blowing thing was that we were in the dressing room, and who walked in but Freddie Mercury's mother.
Oh, wow.
And I actually met his mother. And it was a bit of a trip, the whole thing, obviously.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine what that day meant to her. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, I think, well, I don't know, from what I could gather, she didn't really have much to do with following his career. Right. I don't think, there were things about his personality and the way he lived his life that I don't think his parents were too keen on.
Right.
So I don't think they really, followed his career or all that kind of stuff because they didn't approve.
Yeah, they might have been a bit more conservative than he was, I would assume. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Even still, though, like if that's your, I mean, you're a parent, right? Imagine an event like this for your son. That's got to be, wow, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
She must have been like, wow, I guess my son was famous.
Right, right. It's funny when you think about that stuff. Moving on to Three Sides, you mentioned, while you were in London, you hit Abbey Road and did some recording with the symphony for Three Sides. Um, Again, kind of going back to the time and place, that was Three Sides is an incredible record. I love it. But it was very ambitious at the time. Did you have like what are your thoughts on the original idea of that album? Like, did you guys decide let's go for it?
It's funny again, like to go back into that whole, what your perception is right now compared to what it was back in, I guess we were recording it, I guess in '92.
Right.
I guess it was quite ambitious at the time, and I remember having a discussion that, we're going to run out of space on the CD because CDs only play up to 70-something minutes of music.
Right.
And now to think, there's a lot of albums that are only like 30 minutes long or 45 minutes long. To think that we were putting like 70-something minutes of music on a record is definitely a lot of, a lot for someone to digest. So, the third side, to me, it's some of my favorite things that, Extreme has ever done is on that third side.
Yeah.
But a lot of people may not have even gotten to it because, it was at the end of a long record. So it also came out at a time where Nirvana and all these bands had just broken.
Right.
And so the idea of a band doing this opus with the orchestra and a pristine, really polished, sonically, the record was very clean. So at a time where the whole, Smells Like Teen Spirit was taking the world by storm, timing-wise, it couldn't have been a worse, timing for a record like that. But hey, we're still proud of it to this day, and there is a lot of great stuff on it, and very well could be my favorite Extreme record.
indulgentiam, absolutium, remissionem peccatorum tuum, tribu ad tebi omnipotens, et misericors Dominus amen. Dominus noster Jesu Christus, te absolva, et ego autoritate ipsis te absolva. Ab omni vinculo, excommunicationes, suspensiones, et interdictio, in quantum posset et indices, vende ego te absolvo. Peccati tuis in nomine Patris, et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
It's funny you talk about the timing of it. Compared to porno graffiti and, like you said, the musical landscape, like it only reached number 10, right? It only sold, whatever, how many copies it sold, 700,000 or something like that. I mean, that's, for anybody to classify it in any way, anything other than awesome is just being unfair. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's high expectations when porno graffiti had gone double platinum in the U.S.
Right.
So when a record comes out and only goes gold,
Right.
only is a relative word,
Right.
Most bands would kill to have a gold record. So, I mean, for us it was still a success, but then again, you could feel the tide turning, and the labels started to have less interest in bands like us and looking to sign the next Pearl Jam or the next Soundgarden. So,
Right.
In fact, Soundgarden was the band on A&M that kind of, suddenly all their focus was on Soundgarden. And, so timing-wise, things can be, people can be fickle.
Right.
Radio stations, record companies, they can certainly, they've been known to chase, trends.
Yeah.
So we were a victim of it. Even though I don't feel like we ever really fit in with a lot of the bands from our era. And we still feel it sometimes when we play like these, M3s or Rocklahoma or the Monsters of Rock crews. I'm like, we're certainly not really like a lot of the bands from our era. At least not, we don't think we are. But, I think at the time, we weren't quite like some of those other bands.
Right.
We're also kind of guilty by association when the tide was turning.
Right. Yeah, it's funny if you just if you could just lift Extreme's career from the very late 90s or very late 80s rather through like 95 and place that like a decade earlier, you wouldn't have had those issues because like I said, there was a clear path of development, right?
Yeah.
So was there kind of a reaction? So when Punchline comes out, was that a reaction in some way to make, hey, let's just make a deliberate, straight ahead rock record?
I don't know that we sat down and like really analyzed it and said, hey, this is the way things are going. Let's make a stripped down record. It was more like, okay, when we when we made Porn Graffiti and then we made Three Sides, we always kind of felt like every record was a little different or it had its own personality. So it was like, where do you go from Three Sides? Do you make another, record that sounds like that, or do you try and experiment and do something a little different? So I don't know if subconsciously it may have been more, like, okay, this sounds a bit more like the other stuff that's on the radio now, or if it was just, let's just, make a record and not worry so much about the, the pristine production.
Right. You also love that record. So after Punchline, Extreme kind of goes on, I guess, a hiatus, and that's been sort of well documented. Gary ends up in Van Halen. Nuno does Schizophonic and all his side projects. Where were you at that time? And I don't mean that in terms of like professionally, but maybe like personally. Were you frustrated? Were you disappointed that this had sort of splintered a bit? Where were you at that point?
When during the Punchline tour, it was a little bit of a it was a little bit of a dark period, I think, for the band just in general. Knowing that the record company was obviously showing less interest. We were playing some smaller venues than we had done on the previous tours. Paul Geary exited the band.
Right.
There were a lot of kind of dark clouds over the band, and Nuno was like writing more and more where he, wanted to write some lyrics. There was a little bit of a tension in the band around that where I think Gary always felt, he was the lyricist. And we had spent so much time together, whether it was, on the road for months and months at a time. And then when the band would get home, then we'd go in the studio together. So there was we were definitely burnt out on, touring and then being together so much that I think the band just needed a break anyway. So, Nuno said, I want to go, record some songs. I've been working on some solo stuff. And we were all like, fine, go do that and then come back to Extreme. But then he told us, my heart's really just not into Extreme right now, and I'm just going to go, do this solo career.
Right.
And we were definitely frustrated and bummed out and oh my God, I can't believe, this is over, or that, in his mind it's over.
Right.
I think for me and Gary, it always felt like unfinished business. It wasn't it wasn't like if we're going to get back together someday. It was like when we're going to get back together someday.
Right.
So, everyone kind of did their own thing. I did play in another band for a while and made an album with Jason Bieler from Saigon Kick.
Right.
And it was called Super Transatlantic. And we actually had a song on the American Pie soundtrack. You remember the movie American Pie?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I was still active doing some music, but also just kind of enjoying life a bit, taking a step back and just being around my family. And, I was married at the time, bought a house, and, just enjoyed being home for a bit. So,
yeah.
it wasn't until the phone rang again in like 2005 or 2006 when, we talked about putting Extreme back together to do some reunion shows. I was like, I'm all in. I'm ready. I'm waiting.
Right. Well, there would be in those off years. There would be like you played in Portugal. I think they were like one-off gigs here and there. So, I mean, from a fan perspective, I always got the impression that you guys, the same thing like you said, it was just a matter of time, right? That you guys still seemed to be cool with each other and all that stuff. And VH1 did that horrible show, and it just seemed like it was somewhat inevitable. I do want to ask you about your.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, like the VH1 thing, it was kind of funny, the kind of candid camera type thing.
Right.
And I wanted to do it. It would have been fun, and it would have been great exposure for the band. But I think Nuno's posture was that we're not going to let a TV station who basically turned their back on us. They're not going to dictate when the band's going to get back together and do a reunion. We're going to do it on our terms. It's not just going to be for an hour televised special, and we're they're going to tell us which songs we have to play, and
right.
So he was like, we're going to get back together, but we're going to do it when we want to and on our terms. So that's how it ended up, happening.
Yeah. In hindsight, he was absolutely right. That was. As a fan, I remember watching that and thinking, that's just awful. And he was absolutely right in his response. I couldn't have agreed more. I want to ask you about your farming, because during that piece they profiled you with your alpaca farm. Is that, you still have that? That's still going strong?
I still have some alpacas, but at this point, they're more of a hobby or, pasture pets that I like having a farm and like being around animals. And, it's not, at the time, it was actually more of like a business venture. There was, a time where like I did step away from music completely, still played for my own, fun or amusement, but didn't think about, I said I really want to step back and not play music professionally and just do something completely different.
Right.
I need to learn how to do something else because, even for my own sanity. And so that's when I kind of got into the alpaca thing and really met some great people, had a lot of fun doing it. But, again, things kind of take their course over time.
Right.
They've become less and less of a business for me and more, just kind of just something still healthy and therapeutic about getting out here and taking care of the farm. But obviously music has picked back up and been more of my central focus professionally. So
yeah. So in 2014, you released your first solo album, and it was, you did it through Pledge Music, and you're doing it again, and I do want to talk about that. The first one is Time Will Tell, 2014, and man, it is really, really good. Again, from a fan perspective, and I'm not just saying that to say it because I'm a fan or whatever, but damn, it's a good job, man. It makes.
Well, I appreciate it.
From this side, man, why did it take you so long? You know what I mean?
Again, well, thanks for saying so, first of all. And, I certainly am proud of that record. You're right. I should have done it like 10 years beforehand. In fact, the guy I've been collaborating with the most, and the guy I have to say is the most responsible for, making these records with me is Blue. And Blue is super talented, singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and he's the producer. So we've been hanging out for years, and there was actually a time where he was having some problems in his personal life, and he actually lived with me for about a year. And we used to record and write, and it was always fun, but I never really thought, I'm going to sit down and make an album or make a record. he was like writing and making records of his own, and had a bit of a solo career going. And it was like several years ago where I was getting a little bit frustrated. I wanted to express myself, write some lyrics, some things that happened to me in my personal life that I kind of wanted to, put down and, kind of purge a little bit.
Right.
And, it's a little bit kind of a version of therapy, I suppose. And so I talked to Blue. I said, hey, man, like, you have any songs kicking around, some ideas, because I have some lyrical ideas. And he sent me a bunch of stuff, and I, got really inspired to record a lot of it. And so we got together and made that record. I guess you said it was 2014.
Right.
And I had such a great experience doing the Pledge Music thing. Obviously the record business has changed a lot. The way people buy music or even hear music is completely different than, everything that I, myself or Extreme or people from our era, it's so different than what we were used to. It was like the whole rules and the whole thing has changed.
Yeah.
People now stream music more so than buying, our first Extreme album came out in vinyl, and then, cassettes, and then Porn Graffiti, and then by the time Punchline came out, it only came out on CD, I think,
right.
or, cassettes and CDs. So, obviously the record business has changed a lot. A lot of labels don't even exist. There's only a handful that exist. Radio's so fragmented. Radio, like a lot of the stations I used to listen to, don't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
Record stores, there's, very few record stores. So, let's face it, a guy in my 40s, I'm not going to get a traditional record deal like back in the 80s, So Pledge Music gave me a huge opportunity to actually be able to fund a record and release it myself. It's like, it's like having my own independent label, reaching, my Extreme fans that would be kind of curious to see what I would have to say. Social media has become such a big thing. So obviously, advertising or posting stuff on Facebook and Twitter and all these things, that's what people do now. That's what artists have turned to. Like, social media is such a big part of the whole deal now.
Oh, yeah.
I think, and it also came at a time where a lot of Extreme fans were kind of waiting for the next Extreme thing and going like, we weren't really that active with social media and that kind of stuff. So I had put out a lot of behind-the-scenes footage and things that people had never seen before. So I think a lot of our fans went from like, dying of thirst to, I gave them, suddenly a flood of water to drink.
So you actually had, going back to Punchline, you had some co-writes on that album. Had you been writing songs all along, or was it Time Will Tell that really kicked that into high gear for you?
Time Will Tell really had kind of kicked it more into high gear, where I was writing lyrics and writing some melodies and things like that. My participation on the Extreme stuff was more, playing a bass riff, and the bass riff turned into a song. And Gary was usually responsible for the lyrics at that time.
Right.
And at the time, I just didn't really have much to say. It wasn't until later in life that I kind of felt like, I wanted to express myself, or some things that happened that I felt were worth, singing about. So
yeah, it's, you mentioned some things happen, and there's some obviously deeply personal stuff on that album, like Losing Faith is obviously about, the passing of your mother and things like that. Like, how is that easy for you at that time, writing lyrics, or was it in any way arduous? Did it just flow out?
It kind of just flowed out, to be honest with you. I, there was definitely a lot of, and I even played upon it in the artwork. I kind of had to make light of it in the artwork, but in the songs, there was a lot of things dying. There was relationships dying. Obviously my mother passed away. There was, I guess I got kind of hit, with a few waves of like some really heavy stuff that went on in my life. And a lot of it did end up, making it into the lyrics. I'm not responsible for all the lyrics on the record, but there's certain songs that are for sure, things I can either relate to or things that I wrote.
So I stood by your room, waiting for him to come and take you home, watching the minutes becoming hours, facing days all alone. And people pass me by in slow motion life, but I'm set in stone, standing in the doorway, saying that I need you. So why am I here on my own? I'm here all alone. What's the point in speaking if you can't hear what I'm saying? And what's the point in being here if you don't plan on staying? I'm losing faith, losing faith. So I'm losing my friend, losing my mom, the shattering blow. The years are just spinning, time runs in circles, but where does it go? You just pass me by in slow motion life, like you didn't know that I'm standing in the doorway, saying that I need you. So why am I here on my own? I'm here all alone. What's the point in speaking if you can't hear what I'm saying? And what's the point in being here if you don't plan on staying? I'm losing faith. I'm losing faith in myself and faith in what's yet to come. My hope for you and my love for everyone, one by one. I'm losing faith. I'm losing. What's the point in speaking if you can't hear what I'm saying? And what's the point of praying here if you don't plan on staying? I'm losing faith. I'm losing faith. Losing faith. I'm losing faith.
Yeah, as far as that record, it definitely has some tone, but it definitely has also, a lot of hooky kind of, some cool melodies and harmonies. So it's not all depressing, but there definitely is kind of an undercurrent of some some dark stuff in there.
Yeah, and it ends with "Come On, Come On," which is this great. That's an uplifting song. That's a great closer on that album.
Yeah, it's kind of like the ray of light at the end.
There you go. Before I ask about Nasty Ass Honey Badgers, which is the new album, as I understand it, Extreme has recorded a new album. It's in the can. Is that completed?
No, we have probably like 20 songs that we've like demoed.
Okay.
In various stages of demos.
Okay.
And so we will, when all our schedules kind of align, we're definitely going to be recording another record, but it's hasn't been moving at the fastest speed. But that's par for the course of the Extreme, right? We're used to taking like 10 years between records.
You guys are becoming like Sade, right? Where she does one record every 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
I think it's
it'll
been
come out when it's ready.
right. I think it's been 8
It's like
years.
a fine wine.
There you go. It just gets better with age. There you go. Yeah, I think it's been 8
Yeah.
years since Saudades, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, something like that. But who's counting?
Your fans are counting. That's who's counting. Any talk of? I meant to ask this as we were talking about Three Sides stuff, but any talk of doing that on the road like you did Porno Graffiti? Because I think next year is 25th anniversary.
People have asked us about that. We've been, even some of the promoters or management has said, hey, have you thought about doing that? But I don't think, the band's going to be focused on making new material and writing new songs. I think we would all go crazy just like, playing old stuff forever. I think it's time for us to move on and do something new. Porno Graffiti was definitely a fun run, and it was a trip to actually play some of those songs live and play it in order and all that kind of stuff. But I really don't think that's going to happen with Three Sides.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Time for new stuff.
Gotcha. And that brings us to Nasty Ass Honey Badgers. So going from, is this more of a, so the name change, is this more of a band setting, or is that just the name of the record?
Well, the funny thing is it's actually less of a band than Time Will Tell was.
Okay.
It's more of, again, it's kind of, I call it a studio adventure.
Okay.
Because it's not songs that I have a band that we play out or that I've even been in a room playing with people.
Right.
I have collaborated with so many people on this project, and I joke about it saying, like, if we ever took this on the road, we'd have to have like 12 buses to have all the musicians on it. And so, it was really just kind of a, and again, I don't know if you've heard the first song, or one of the first songs was Evil Queen that I released. Kind of a fun, lighthearted song.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just released Take What We Want, which is absolutely ridiculous and borderline stupid, but fun. So
Right.
I wanted people to know, like, right out of the box, this is going to be a fun one. It's not going to be as heavy as the first one.
Right.
And of course, with the name of the band, it's obviously a play on that viral video that was out a few years ago. I don't know if you ever saw it, but there was a Crazy Nasty Ass Honey Badger video that was on YouTube and like up to 80 million hits or something. And so, a lot of people would joke or call me the Honey Badger or whatever, or Take What You Want, or, Honey Badger Don't Care and all that shit. So I just thought it would be funny to do a song kind of based on that video, and then obviously kind of turn into, well, why don't we just call the band, the fake band, the Nasty Ass Honey Badger? it's actually a short record. It's about 28 minutes long.
Okay.
Six songs, but the Beatles' first record was also 28 minutes long. So
Right.
it's not it's just kind of a short, quick, in your face. It's longer than an EP, but shorter than a 45-minute album. And again, I have a few guests that are appearing on it. It's like the first record was mostly me singing,
Right.
but this one I was like, well, let's do it like let's do it kind of like the bands that you would think of that had multiple singers. Like one guy might sing this song, then there might be another guy for a couple songs, and hey, maybe even on this song we'll let Ringo sing.
Right. Right.
So it kind of has that flavor to it, where I sing about half of it, and then I have guest vocalists on a few tracks.
Right.
But it's been a whole lot of fun to make this record.
I
think it'll show and people.
Who are your guests? You have Justin. You have some fella named Gary, I think.
Yeah. Well, Gary Sharon, obviously, he's singing on Evil Queen. He does lead vocal. But then he and Justin actually trade off on another song that I'm super excited about. I haven't even released it yet. But Justin sings lead vocals, and then Gary sings the choruses, and then the last verse. It's almost like, when you would picture the Who, like Townsend and Daltrey trading off, how their voices are so distinctive. And both of those guys totally put their stamp on the song.
Nice.
Super excited about it. Yeah.
Nice.
And then a friend of mine from actually that I've known since like grade school, does the closing track, but spoken word. It's like monologues, and there's like it's a reprise of the Take What We Want. It kind of goes with the same theme of the Nasty Ass Honey Badgers to close out the record, and then there's a bunch of guitar players that that totally shred on the record. It's like some really tasty, great guitar work all over the thing. So there wasn't a whole lot of guitar stuff on Time Will Tell as far as solo-wise. It was more like rhythm guitar stuff.
Right.
So this one has much more, lead guitar stuff on it.
That's cool. Now that you've gotten to the solo album phase, right? And like you said, the business has changed, that you can kind of do this independently. You can use things like Pledge Music. Do you imagine this is something somewhat of a fruitful period? Like, are you going to keep doing this, put out another one every, say, year or two? Obviously, you can't predict the future, but are you inspired to have a pace like that?
Well, I didn't really know at the time when I made Time Will Tell. It wasn't like in my master plan that, in 2 years I'll make another one.
Right.
It was kind of like, okay, well, I have another collection of songs, and Blue City's coming into town. So, man, it was so much fun doing the first one. Let's record more songs, and I'll do another campaign and see if people are still interested in hearing something new, something I get to say. So, who knows? Maybe it might be another couple of years we'll have another collection of songs, or maybe 5 years, or who knows? I don't know. It's hard to predict, but all I know is right now it is kind of a fruitful time where have been inspired to write, and I'm gonna be, I've been writing more songs than I could imagine the band Extreme doing. It's not like they're gonna do 5 of my songs, so
Right.
It gives me another avenue to put out some new music that that I'm excited about.
That's so awesome. Cool. Yeah, the third one, I think you have to go to Abbey Road and make it a 3-sided record and get us right.
Yeah, well, we're gonna need a whole lot of more pledges to make that happen.
It's true. It's true. I put it out to our listeners, our friends, and asked them if they had a fan question. So I have one for you from a gentleman named Rob Goad, and his question is, how did Extreme get involved with the Kiss My Ass project, doing Strutter?
Wow, that is a damn good question, because I don't remember exactly how. I'm trying to remember even what label it came out on. I remember we, excuse me, we did get a question. Someone said, "Hey, would you guys be interested in recording a song for a Kiss tribute record?" Gene and is putting together, so I think it was actually Kiss's idea to have artists do their songs. So the next thing I know, Gary and I were I had lived in a condo at the time, but I remember we were supposed to talk to Gene and talk about what song to do.
Right.
So I remember the phone ringing and my answering machine picking it up, and it's like, "Hello, this is Gene Simmons from Kiss, and I'm looking for Pat Badger." And I'm like, there was another one of those moments. I'm like, okay, well, it's funny that we're coming back to this because we kind of started the interview with my whole, spitting blood and breathing fire. But I'm like, how is it that I'm now like getting calls from Gene Simmons? And it was kind of a mind-blowing, experience going, I was a kid in the Kiss makeup for Halloween, and now, like, Gene's calling me.
Right.
It's like, so, anyway, so we got on the phone with him and discussed, like, which, song options, and then, obviously, we decided on Strutter. So that was another kind of mind warp, kind of weird scenario for me.
Did you screen it so you could have it recorded, so you have that? You have that message?
Well, I would be lying if I didn't say that. But at the time, I was screening phone calls anyway. But I actually did. This was at a time when answer machines were like little cassettes.
Right.
So I did pop the cassette out and put a new cassette in the answer machine so it wouldn't get taped over. But I did save the message. I haven't heard it in years, but
that's cool. That's cool. Well, Pat, I want to thank you for taking the time to, have this conversation and sort of review your career. I'm a huge fan, and I want to plug your websites. So I guess there's 3. There's extreme-band.com. There's Facebook, which is probably the best place to find you kind of day to day, which is facebook.com/pat.badger.9, which means like...
Yeah, I don't know how...
Yeah, did like 8 other people have Pat Badger or something?
Yeah, it was kind of funny that a lot of people had Pat Badger already. Yeah, and then I have a Twitter account as well. I don't remember what number I have behind my name on that one either, but I'm sure people can find it.
Yep.
And well, probably the main one is the Pledge Music one right now.
Right.
So yeah, pledgemusic.com/Badger, and they can find new music and some cool content. Some of these little video clips and behind the scenes stuff. That's the other great thing about Pledge that we didn't talk about is that you're not just pre-ordering music. You're kind of coming along for the whole ride, the whole creative process, everything from songwriting to tracking some of the instruments, meeting some of the musicians involved and all that kind of stuff. It's all kind of part of the Pledge campaign.
Yeah, and you have a lot of fun with that. I love the clips you post with the one with Gary of you being the real singer in the band and Billy Sheehan ripping you off or whatever. That's just classic.
Oh yeah, yeah. Again, it's all in good fun, and
it's great stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely meant to make people laugh. So it's all fun. I got more fun stuff coming too. So
awesome. Well, thank you, sir. Very much appreciated. Thanks for the decades of music. I look forward to the new EP or the new album and beyond. So thank you.
Right on. Okay, well, I appreciate the your time, and we'll catch up, Eric. Thanks a lot.
Our top story tonight is a crime of passion. The victim, an unidentified man, was found in bed wearing only a diaper, holding a bow and arrow in one hand and clutching a letter letter in the other. The letter simply read, Cupid's dead. That's Mr. Patrick Badger on the bass guitar.
Thanks again for listening to this conversation with Pat Badger, and thanks, Pat, for talking with me. It was a real treat for me, like I said, and you could find more of his music. His Facebook page is facebook.com/pat.badger.9. And his probably more important link at the moment is pledgemusic.com/badger. So go check that out. He's got some cool stuff in the works for his new record, Nasty Ass Honey Badger. So hopefully go check that out. And you can find more Pods and Sods on our website, which is podsodcast.com. You can find us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/podssods. You can find us in iTunes, on Stitcher, all these places. Hopefully you'll leave some positive comments and click a couple thumbs and a couple stars and go like us and talk to us and listen to other episodes and all that goodness. So we'll close with some words of wisdom that I always close with. Mr. Bill Hicks. Thank you.
The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us, and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. Has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok? But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love. The eyes of fear want you to put bigger locks on your door, buy guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love instead see all of us as one. Here's what we can do to change the world right now to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would many times over, not one human being excluded, and we can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace.